right, so we shot up there on the hill. I did all the audio, but the wind noise was really horrible. So I'll recap most of it because I don't know how much you're gonna be able to extract from what we did up there, um, or even understand. So I'll just kind of do it as if I didn't say all that up there. All right, so as you think through that paradigm that we talked about with the Philistines pushing up from the coast, okay, up the valley, and the Jews and the Israelites wanting to push down the valley. You can see like where we're standing. So now we're down in the valley itself. You can see that till this day, this is a agricultural gold mine down here. That over here to this side of me, you see where they're plowing and farming. So that's going on over here. Then over here you've got fruit trees. So you can see that even modern economy, they're working really hard to grow things here. It still works. And at the time of the Bible, what you got to understand is that whether you were an Israelite or a Philistine, 90% of your people were working agriculture. Most people were farming just to get enough food to live, to get through the next day or the next season. And so a place like this, I mean, you see how rough and craggy the mountain is behind me, and much of the country is like that, and you can't farm it. So a valley like this, where there's topsoil that can be turned and plowed and used, this is a gold mine, okay? And so this is what they were fighting over. They were fighting over this valley. The Philistines pushed up the valley. The Israelites came down the valley from the mountains, both wanting to control it. And what the Israelites decided, and it makes a ton of sense militarily, is that they would fortify this hill behind me. You see how rough it is. And so the idea is if you get soldiers up there, and they can be supplied, because if you follow that ridge line, it goes all the way to Bethlehem. Okay? So they've got a good line of supply. You see David coming down with his donkey to bring food. Anybody in Bethlehem or Hebron, or those highlands up there could have done that. They could have, loaded up mules, donkeys themselves, and come down to deliver food. So you've got a line of supply. You've got a great defensible position. And so everything in the story makes total sense. It makes sense you'd want the valley. It makes sense that you would camp out up there as a military to defend it. And so then the Philistines, they push up from the coast, which is that way, and then their line of battle went from Soho to Azekah. So Azekah is that bald hill in the background over there, and they kind of wrapped around. They were on the hills down here, wrapping all the way around to Soho, which we can't see, which is back here. But basically their line of battle was along the hills that are in front of me, and the Israelites were on this really rough crag that's back behind me. And so when you read the thing about Goliath taunting the Israelites, it says he did it for 40 days. It says for 40 days he would come out here in the middle of the valley, and what you got to think is when he's out here, minus the fruit trees, which are probably more of a modern thing, but if he's out here in the middle of this valley, then he can be seen by thousands, if not tens of thousands of troops. The Israeli troops on the hill can all see him. The Philistine troops wrapping around on the hills behind can see him. And so he's kind of got a stage out here. Everyone can see him, and he's coming down to taunt them. Now, this thing about 40 days, it's something that if you read the text, you're like, why 40 days? Why would two armies just come and look at each other for 40 days? It doesn't make sense until you stand here. And then when you come here, it makes perfect sense. And the reason is that both armies had defensive positions. The Israelites were on top of that. Imagine trying to fight your way up that while the people behind you are throwing rocks down and arrows and whatever they've got to make your life difficult. And you've got to fight up. Then once you get close, the guy's above you poking down with a spear or sword. That's a tough thing to try to take that hill. But also the Philistines were on hills. And so both armies had great defensive positions, and they wanted the other to attack. And so they just camped, and they taunted each other, particularly the Philistines taunting the Jews. And that's what Goliath is doing. He's coming out here in the middle of this field where thousands of soldiers can see him, and he's demoralizing the Jews. Look how big and tough I am. Look how amazing I am. And they're scared of him, and that sets the stage, okay, for David. When you read the Bible story, what it says is that David's father loaded a donkey with food, and said, take this go check on your brothers and deliver this food to the army. And so he comes down and follows that ridge line up there. Okay, he could have hiked down, with an animal all the way from Bethlehem right along the road till this day goes, along that way, which we kind of rode on earlier. It would have been very easy for him to do. He gets here, and then what happens is he sees this whole thing with Goliath, and David is like, what is going on, and we'll obviously get the text cleared up for for the day we do it. That's how I want to outline that. But basically, what happens in the story is David comes down, he sees it, and he's like, why won't somebody go fight him? And why doesn't he do something about this? And the soldier, he comes out every day and he kind of makes fun of us. And the king has said, whoever will go fight him and kill him, he'll give his daughter in marriage and he'll give his whole family a tax break forever and all this kind of stuff. And it's so funny, like the different perspectives, because the whole army sees Goliath and they're terrified. David sees Goliath and he sees an opportunity. He's like, are you kidding me? And nobody's done this? And it says in verse 26, it says, David spoke to the men who were standing with him, what will be done for the man who kills a Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? And he's kind of, he wants all the details. And the people told him, and then this funny thing happens where David's brother comes up. So Eliab, who's just not a nice guy. God rejected him. Samuel wanted to anoint him. God was like, no, I see the heart. You can't anoint this guy. So he's not a good guy. And he comes up and he makes fun of David. Oh, go back to your few sheep. Leave us alone. Or you're just down here to watch and cause trouble. And David is such a typical sort of brother conversation. David says, what have I done now? Like, what did I do? It's typical brother thing. The exact quote in the Bible is, what have I done now? It was just a question. So he turns aside. But what happens is, it said that what David said was reported to Saul. David said, I'll go fight him. And so somebody said, this kid says he'll fight him. And so he gets drug in front of Saul. And David tells Saul, don't be discouraged. I'm going to kill this guy for you. And of course, Saul looks at David and he sees a little kid. And he's like, he's a teenager. And Saul thinks, you can't do this. You're not equipped. You're not trained. I'm an old, grizzled veteran. I'm a tough guy, soldier king. And I'm scared to go down there. And David's like, no. I killed, when I was taking care of my dad's flocks, I killed a bear, I killed a lion, I can fight, let me go. And Saul kind of says, well, nobody else will go, so sure, go try. And so Saul says, this is kind of what always happens. This is one of the lessons you can lift out of this. Because what Saul does, he says to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. But then it says, then Saul had his own military clothes put on David. So Saul says, okay, I'm not willing to fight the Goliath, but if I did fight him, I would fight him like this, so you should. So this guy's not willing to do it, but he's willing to tell you how to do it. And so he tries to make David put on his stuff. And David, he tries, this doesn't work for me. I'm a shepherd. I fight like a shepherd. Give me my stuff. And so this is what the Bible says. He says, I can't use these. So David took them off and said he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi or the valley. And the creek bed is right over there behind us. So you can see in the tree line behind me, that's where the creek bed is. So it's there. Every geographical detail is perfectly there. And with a sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine, it says. So what he has is he has a rod, a stick, basically, and a sling and 5 stones. Now let's talk for a second about a sling. So, because most Americans don't have a concept of like a sling in combat or battle as a weapon. So the sling was just like a strap of leather and with a little bit of a pouch, and you put a rock in there and you twirl it around and you get going really, really fast. And at some point you let go of one of the strands and that opens up and it flings the rock at really, really high speeds. They can go way over 100 miles an hour. Right? So, you're throwing a rock really fast, and if it hits somebody in the head, it'll kill them. Okay? And, David has used this weapon to great effect. He's killed lions and bears with it. He knows how to use it. He's accurate with it. And the question is, well, how is he accurate with it? Because slings are they're they're notoriously inaccurate weapons. They hit hard, but you don't know what you're going to hit. I have a friend who drove through years ago. The Palestinians still use them during their protests sometimes, and these guys will twirl these things around and let them go, and they'll throw a rock about the size of an orange. Again, way over 100 miles an hour. This friend of mine, kind of got caught in a bad spot, and his car was actually hit, and where the rock hit was the post. It was a miracle the guy lived. It hit the post between the windshield and the driver's side window of the car, and it bent that post in. Okay, so imagine a rock hitting a metal post hard enough to bend it back several degrees. So that's the impact these things have. They hit hard, but they're very, very difficult to be accurate with. So then the question is, well, how was David accurate with it? And the answer is thousands of hours of practice. Okay, because David would have used the sling in herding sheep and defending sheep. So what you got to imagine is thousands and thousands of hours where David, as the youngest child of his family, I think there's strong biblical evidence that David was illegitimate, but I don't know if we want to go into that or not in these videos. Maybe you do. He's kind of a bit of an outcast. Oh, you go tend the sheep. You see that in Eliab's comment, go tend your few sheep. He's this outcast, but he does it to the best of his ability. He goes out there every day. He tends these sheep. And a part of what you do tending sheep, like I've seen this observing shepherds in the country, is that if a sheep wanders a little too far, they'll grab a rock and throw the rock out in front of the sheep. And it'll hit in front of their nose, a foot or so in front of their nose, and it startles the sheep and it'll run back to the herd. Well, if a sheep wanders a little farther, it's a little far to throw. If you're David and you're out there, then you can use a sling to throw a rock farther. If you're good enough at it, you're not going to hit the sheep. And so you see him doing that, and then you see him fighting with it, right? And so David, while tending his sheep, has spent hours and hours and hours perfecting his use of this weapon. And so he's ready. And so this is what it says. He goes down. It says David strapped. Oh, whatever. Let's look at that. It says, okay, so he goes down to approach the Philistine. This is in verse 40. In verse 41, it says the Philistine came closer and closer to David with his shield bearer in front of him. So they're starting to approach each other. And then it says, when the Philistine looked and saw David, he despised him. Okay, so you gotta imagine Goliath is huge. He's 9 feet tall, the Bible says. He's got all this huge weaponry and armor. And he sees this little teenager, and he thinks, are you kidding me? This is your champion? This is who you sent? And so he starts making fun of him, right? The first thing he says is, Goliath looks at David and says, am I a dog? You come against me with sticks? And he cursed David. Then he tells David, like, I'm going to feed you to the birds of the sky, the beasts. So, like, it's basically they're going to talk trash before they fight, right? So, Goliath says, I'm going to feed you to the birds. And David says, yeah, I want to feed you to the birds. But get what David says exactly. He says, you come against me with a dagger, spear, and sword, but I come against you in the name of Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel's armies. You have defied him. Today the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head and give your corpse and the corpses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky. So it's the same thing, but there's a difference. And the difference is why David boasts. Okay? So later, 1,000 years later, when writing the New Testament, Paul is going to say that I boast in the Lord. Okay, here's what that means. In ancient warfare, it was pretty common. I've seen this depicted in movies, maybe, where before a battle, the leaders would sort of ride out and meet each other and kind of talk before we fight. Offer terms of surrender. If you surrender, if you'll do this, this, and this, you can leave the field, or I won't kill you. This sort of banter before you fight. And if you want to look tough and be like, we're gonna kill you, you're gonna say, we're gonna kill you because, right? I think of it in sports terms. If I was playing for the Chicago Bulls back in the 90s, if I was a bench player for the Bulls, during warm-ups, I might look at the other team and say, we're going to kill y'all tonight. But I wouldn't say because of me, because I'm a bench player. I would say because Michael Jordan's on my team. Number 23 over there is going to kill y'all tonight. He's going to score 35 points. And whatever. I want to boast in that guy. We're going to beat you because of him. That's what a military commander would do. We're going to beat you because. Paul says, we boast in the Lord. Hey, I'm going to win because God. And that's what David does. Okay, he doesn't say I'm going to win because I've invested 10,000 hours learning how to use a sling. He says we're going to win because God. He boasts in the Lord. He knows where his source is. And then a really cool thing happens. The Philistine begins to approach David. So they're like coming forward to fight. And this is what it says. It says, when the Philistines started forward to attack David, David quickly ran toward the line of battle. So you think that maybe David would be, his advantage. He's going to throw stuff at you, and he's faster, so he would like run away and run around or whatever. But the Bible says he just ran right at him. In my head, I envision him. He puts the sling in. He kind of twirls the thing as he's running, and bam, he launches it, and it hits Goliath absolutely right in the forehead. And it says, whoops, I lost my spot. It says when they can. Oh shoot! Well, we won't do today. We're really filming. When the Philistines started forward to attack him, David ran quickly to the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in the bag, took out a stone, slung it, and hit the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank in to his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So the rock hit him hard enough to actually sink into his head, which is pretty gross. David takes out right out here in the valley in front of all these people, witnesses. He pulls the sword, Goliath's own sword, cuts his head off with it. And you got to imagine all the guys in that hill back there, like, rah, and they come charging down. Let's get them. And all the guys in the hills back here are like, oh no, we lost our champion. And they're scared, and their morale is up. And all of a sudden, we're going to fight, and the Israelites carry the day. Now, that's the story. What do we learn from the story? Okay, and I think that there are plenty of things you could extract from it. I think you could look at it and say that you have giants in your way in your life somehow, and if you don't confront them, you're not going to get to your destiny. And that's a valid point. I think people have brought that out before. I think there's something to be extracted from David's anointing, which is in the previous chapter, where he's not even brought in. So his father disrespects him, and then Samuel wants to anoint the older brother, and finally he anoints David, but he kind of didn't want to. And then you see in this chapter, you see his brother kind of make fun of him when he gets down here, and then he finally gets before the king, which is earthly authority, and the king's like, you can't do this, but he kept talking, and then he gets down here and Goliath. Basically, everybody in David's life says, you can't. His spiritual authority, his father, his brother, his governmental or earthly authority, the king, even everybody says you can't, but he can because God's with him. So there's something about that too, which is pretty cool. But to me, the big thing, the big takeaway, like what is the devotional point in the story here, or at least one I think would work, is the power of faithfulness. The fact that David, as the lowest ranking member of his family, the youngest son, maybe even illegitimate, kicked out, sure, take a few sheep off somewhere and leave us alone, not even invited in. Even in that, he's faithful. He shows up every day, he does his job, and he does it well. He protects his sheep, he defends his sheep. And that faithfulness, that daily faithfulness, is what prepares David for his destiny. Who would have thought that the pathway to the throne was being a faithful shepherd? But it was. Because this fight in this field right here is what made David a national hero. He was propelled to the throne because this fight, he was prepared to win this fight because he was faithful every day and he was good at his job. And so when he gets down here, he wins. And even in that, he's faithful because by chapter 17 of Samuel, he's been anointed as king. And so now he's not a king yet. He's still a shepherd, and he's doing that faithfully. But he also needs to be faithful to his people, and he sees this threat. He's like, no, I can do that. Everyone else was scared, but he's like, let me go fight. I'll go fight, And so what I see in David that makes him special is, again, It is the faithfulness thing. And the faithfulness sets you up. It prepares you. It lays the groundwork for God to work the miracles. Later, Jesus would say, faith. Jesus said that, right? Faith will move mountains. Faith like a mustard seed. That's a Jesus quote, right? That won't make the final cuts of videos either. But later, Jesus will say, faith like a mustard seed, will move a mountain. But in Greek, there's actually no difference between the word faith and faithfulness. Your faithfulness moves mountains too. And I think that's kind of the key. David is just there. And so he's prepared, and God can use that, and in his path to the throne, his destiny, kind of worked out because of that.